this lesson is I can review right triangle trigonometry. So right triangle trigonometry is something you spend time with in Math 2. And so in Math 3, we're just going to review it because we're going to use it for some future lessons that we have. Okay, so trigonometry is just the study of how angles and side measures relate to each other. When we talk about trigonometry, like in Math 2, that's just using sine, cosine, and tangent to solve for missing sides and angles in right triangle. So sometimes you'll hear this referred to as right triangle trig. So the only time we're going to use this stuff that we're reviewing is when we have right triangles. So the first thing I wanted to make sure you remember is this little, this little sign right here. That is theta. That's a Greek letter. And that just refers to as an angle measure. And then sometimes you'll also see x degree sign. Either one of those mean the same thing. It's talking about an angle measure. Okay, so depending on which angle in the triangle you're talking about determines which one the opposite, adjacent, and the hypotenuse is. Okay, so the hypotenuse is always the longest side, and it's going to be across from the right angle, always. And then the other two are determined by where the angle is that you're referring to. So, if you'll look at angle theta, that's angle A, the side directly across from that is the opposite side. And then the side that is touching the angle, so if you'll notice the hypotenuse in green and the adjacent are the two sides that are actually making that angle. So the side that's touching the angle that's not the hypotenuse is the adjacent. So whenever you see adjacent, think about touching. And then opposite means opposite, so hopefully that makes sense. So you gotta know which one the opposite, which one the adjacent, and which one the hypotenuse is in order to use the next thing we're going to talk about. Okay, so usually people can remember this saying, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. So when we say some old hippie, that's our sine function. Sine is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So some old hippie, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. When we say caught another hippie, that is referring to our cosine. So that is adjacent over hypotenuse. Caught another hippie, cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. And then the last one, I'm going to do this in yellow, tripping on acid, that's your tangent. So tangent is opposite over adjacent, tripping on acid. So here's what we have. Some old hippie, sine opposite over adjacent, and then caught another hippie, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and then the last one, tripping on acid, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So that sentence is just so you can remember how to set up the three different trig ratios, sine, cosine, and tangent. Okay, so let's talk about some other stuff you did in your calculator. Remember, anytime we do this, make sure that when you go to mode, it is in degree mode because triangles are measured in degrees. So when you click mode, you want to make sure degree is highlighted and not radian. The other thing is right here are your sine, cosine, and tangent. These buttons, the white ones, it's just regular sine, cosine, and tangent, are to find side lengths. When you're finding angles, you have to hit the second button, and that's how you get the little, we call it the inverted or inverse sine, cosine, and tangent. That's how you get the sine to the -1, or the cosine to the -1, or the tangent to the -1. So these buttons you're going to use when you're finding angles. So the regular white buttons, just regular sine, cosine, and tangent, are for finding sides. And then the inverted signs, the one to the little -1 exponent, you have to hit by pushing the second button first. And those you're only going to use when you're finding angles. Okay, so that's just some other review. Okay. Alright, so here's our first problem. We're going to solve for x in every single one of these problems. I didn't put that on there. I don't know why. So the angle that we are going to be referring to is the 30-degree angle. So if you'll look at 15, 15 is directly across from 30 degrees. So that is my opposite side. I'm going to just do OPP for opposite. And then if you'll notice that the X side is directly across from the right angle, it's also the longest side, so that's your hypotenuse. So when you remember that sentence, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. The only one that deals with opposite and hypotenuse is sine. So that's why we're going to use the sine function. And it's always set up the same way. Sine of the angle, our angle we're referring to is 30, is equal to, and remember it's opposite over hypotenuse. So the opposite side is 15 and the hypotenuse is x. Some old hippie. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Sine of 30 equals 15 over x. So that sine 30 is just a button in the calculator. So go ahead and type that into your calculator and see what you get. Give me at least 2 decimal places. And also, you can do these in just a regular scientific calculator. A calculator on your phone, just turn it sideways. So the sine of 30 is equal to 0.5, so that equals 15 over x. So if you look at this problem, people get really confused about this. The only thing that you could do here is to get rid of the dividing by x. So the only way to get rid of division is to multiply by x. So I'm going to multiply by x, so it's going to go on the opposite side. And now the whole point of this, again, is to get x by itself. The only thing I can do to get rid of that 0.5 is to divide both sides by 0.5. So x equals, and you can type that in your calculator if you do not know, 15 divided by 0.5 is 30. Alright, so the longest side, the hypotenuse, is 30. Alright, so now we're going to do pretty much the same thing, except this time we're going to use this angle 60 over here. And then notice that we don't have the opposite side from 60. So we are not going to be using opposite. We're going to be using the other two. This one is my hypotenuse because notice it's across from the 90-degree angle. It's the longest side. And so that means that this x down here is my adjacent side. I know it's the adjacent side because it's touching the 60-degree angle and it's not the hypotenuse. So when I think about some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid, the only one that deals with adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine. So I'm going to set it up. Cosine of the angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Caught another hippie. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay, so cosine 60 is just a button on the calculator, and it's 0.5 again. And then remember that we're just trying to get x by itself. So the only way to get rid of dividing by 20 is to multiply both sides by 20. And so, oh, I just did that wrong. That's completely wrong. I did that in my head. That's embarrassing. Let's try that again. 20 times 0.5 is 10. There we go. Alright, so that adjacent side that was missing is 10. Alright, and then this is going to be the next one that we're doing. So we're referring to 30. We have the opposite side. We also have the adjacent side. So some old hippie, we don't need to use sine. Caught another hippie, don't need to use cosine. Tripping on acid. So tangent is the only one that deals with opposite and adjacent. So the tangent of the angle equals opposite over adjacent. So tan 30 is just a button in the calculator. I'm going to put it as 0.577 equals 10 over x. Oh, I just wrote that wrong. 10 over x. And then to get rid of dividing by x, I'm going to multiply it to both sides. So it just moves over to the next side. And then to get rid of the 0.577, I'm going to divide that. So 10 divided by, you can either do 0.577 or you could just do the tan of 30 so that you're not rounding at all. And so I'm going to give at least 2 decimal places every time I do this. So I got 17.32. Okay, so that was an example for each of the ratios for finding side lengths. We did sine, we did cosine, we did tangent. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at when you find the angle measures. So I know I'm finding the angle measures because x is now an angle. Alright, still, once again, you have to know which side lengths you have. So 3 is opposite from the x. And then 5 is right across from the right angle, so that's my hypotenuse. And then using that sentence, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid, we should know that sine is the only one that deals with opposite and hypotenuse. So the sine of the angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. So remember that when we do this, we're going to use the little inverted signs, so sine to the -1, and it's just a different button. So you have to hit the second button, and then you hit the sine button to get that little the little to the -1 on your screen. And then make sure you put 3/5 in the parentheses. Alright, so I'm going to round. I got approximately, let's see, 36 point, I'm going to do 87 degrees. So if you don't have a calculator at home that can do this, you can either go to Haiku and download the free one, watching that video, or you can just like Google inverse trig relation calculator, and you can do that very easily. You can do it on your phone and it'll do this. So a regular phone calculator is not going to have this type button, but you can find ways to do it. Alright, so now we're going to do this one. So we're looking for this angle x. We have the hypotenuse because it's right across from the right angle. And we also have the adjacent because it's touching it. So some old hippie won't work. Call another hippie. That's the one we have to use. So cosine of x equals, remember it's caught another, so adjacent on top of hypotenuse hippie. Alright, so this is the inverse cosine to the -1. It's just a different button in the calculator, or you can use just a simple online calculator. Just Google inverse trig calculator, something like that, and it'll pop up. It's really easy. So give me at least 2 decimal places. So I'm going to say approximately 53.13 degrees. Alright, and then you can probably guess the next one. It's going to be tangent. It's the opposite side, so notice that 12 is directly across from x, and then 5 has to be the adjacent side because it's touching, and then some old hippie doesn't work, caught another hippie doesn't work, but the tripping on acid does work. So tangent of x equals 12 divided by 5. So these are pretty easy. Type that into your calculator. Remember that you're doing the inverse of tan to the -1. Make sure you're using the correct button. So I got approximately 67.38 degrees. Alright, so hopefully that made sense. Just remember you're either finding angles like the last 3 problems, or you're finding sides like the first 3. And then remember the different buttons and which one you're using, and just making sure you understand the sentence and when to use which trig ratio. Alright, I got a little treat for you at the end. Wow! Amos wanted to help me make a video, so I just let him draw a beautiful picture. There you go. Hopefully that gets trig back into your head, because we're going to use it in some future lessons. And it's pretty easy. I think most people get trig. But if you don't, you can email me, send me a message on Remind, watch some Khan Academy videos, do whatever you need to do. Alright, I'll see you later, guys. Bye.